The story of this 59 Burst, like its owner, has a history that is entwined with the musical soul of Dublin, and its sound has shaped the city's music scene in ways that are still felt today. Once I heard the story of this guitar's past, I knew I wanted Gibson to be part of his future. This is the story of the Orphanage Burst.
There's a street in Dublin called Capel Street, and at one end of the street there's a bar, a music venue called Slattery's Pub, and at the other end there's a music venue called the Earl Grattan, as it was called then. My father was playing there, and Gary Moore was playing in this place. This guy entered the streets, very quiet nights, just music going on. The guy walks by the first bar, Slattery's. Gary Moore's playing a song with his 1959 Gibson Les Paul. And as he walks down towards the other end of the street, he hears the same song with my father playing his 1959 Gibson Les Paul. And the guy was like, what the hell's going on? Gary and my father started a song at the same time, pretty much the same guitar, and this guy was like walking down the street, hearing two Gibson Les Pauls on the same street in Dublin. How is that possible, no?
So when I found out about the guitar itself, and particularly that it was Gibson Les Paul, I knew I had to connect the family with Cesar in some way, just not only for the advice, but there's no one better placed than the CEO of Gibson Guitars to give the advice on, you know, what to do with a guitar like this.
I first find out about the guitar through Barry at the Decent Cigar Emporium in Dublin, Ireland. He gave me a call as I was his client and explained to me the situation of this guitar being with this family in Dublin, with Joe Staunton's family, and wanting to know if I was interested in taking a look at the guitar, potentially acquiring it. Once I connected with Barry and we started talking about this guitar, he introduced me to Paul Staunton, Joe's son, who then started sharing photographs with me. And that really blew my mind, because when you look at this instrument, you look at that flame pattern. It's a highly flamed maple top. It's got all kinds of wear in unique places that you would normally not see, because Joe was a lefty. And so we started looking at all these details, all that pick wear on the other side where he used to, you know, play as a lefty, all these different details that made it so cool and so special, all the way from the top, the back, the headstock, the fingerboard. He had almost worn out the entire bottom part of the binding. So all these different details of this guitar made it very special. And then I knew we were on to something with this one.
Joe was the living embodiment of blues. He truly believed it. It was the way he played, the way the singers would play, and he liked it loud, and he was not ashamed of it.
And the crowd would just keep clapping, you know, saying, Joe, 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 go, Joe, 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 just the one note, you know. But it was really exciting.
Joe was a real feisty guy, and often people play the way that their personalities are. And well, Joe was just that, a feisty player, and like every note seemed to mean something to Joe, because he was a left-handed player, so the controls were here. Joe would always be moving the controls. You'd always see his hand going up here. It was almost like him giving you a cue, but he was always altering the tones on the guitar, really fighting for those notes.
When we met, actually, that was one thing that kind of drew us together as well, talking about our experiences in school, particularly in the 60s, you know, when people thought left-handed people were southpaws, part of the devil's people.
You would think because this guitar was a right-handed and Joe was a left-handed, you'd obviously think, oh, how's this going to work? Look, when you get a Les Paul and you feel so happy having it, you make it work.
Well, everyone calls him the left-handed wizard. Yeah, he was pretty spectacular.
Band Orphanage came together when Philip Lynott, he departed from Skid Row, and so he was obviously looking to try and form a new band, and he got together with Brian Downey. So the two of them together were obviously just where they're going to find the members for whatever band they're going to create. And they came to my brother Pat Quigley, who the movement had just disbanded also. Lots of things happened in 1969. And he was free looking for a band to be with also. And Joe Staunton was his friend. So they needed a guitar player, so Pat would have introduced Joe to Philip and Brian. And that was the beginning of Orphanage.
The way it works is I'm the band leader. The reason I got to know Joe was that I fired the great Phil Lynott around 1970. But I taught him how to play, so we're still the best of friends. And he introduced me to this lad, Joe Staunton. We're going to put a band together called Orphanage.
You know, I can't remember exactly how many months they were on the road, but it didn't last that long, up to a year. And I remember Philip saying that he's going to change the band. He's creating a new band. He told me it was going to be called Thin Lizzy. When Orphanage split, Joe and Pat they stuck together, and Pat put together his new band called Macbeth.
In the late 60s, he wrote music, and the 70s, 80s. I have cassettes of songs he wrote with Phil Lynott, like early songs. And then he wrote some hits in the 70s.
We used to go into Slattery's, a pub in Capel Street, and Dad would be gigging away, and my friends used to come in, my brother, my sister. So it was always a good night, good crack.
I remember Joe was just full of life, and we just got on, we hit it off immediately, as musicians often do, but Joe's a special guy. It was just great fun, and I ended up playing with him quite a bit in different sort of ensembles, let's say, bands.
Joe asked me to join him in the late 80s in Talk to Strangers, which had a residency in Slattery's. So I joined Joe, and it was steady work. We were there every Friday night, and the place was packed.
In them days, I used to be out searching for second-hand equipment, and I knew all the musicians in town. I'd hear somebody selling off their amp or the guitar or something. This chap, which I can't remember his name, he had the Les Paul that we're talking about. When I went home, my brother Pat was in the band with Joe, and I told Pat about this great guitar we got in, because it's a sort of, you know, Les Pauls were like your BMW of the time. So Pat and Joe came across to the shop, and he actually loaned the money to Joe to buy the guitar, and he bought it for £250, and that's how it came about, how Joe had it.
No, I think he always knew the guitar was special. You know, he was very happy with the guitar, playing the guitar, using the guitar like for the tools of his trade as such. So he never contemplated how much the guitar was worth.
You know, the guitar clearly went everywhere with Joe, and he brought it, I can only imagine, to some incredible gigs, and the stories that guitar could tell as well.
The value was not something I really thought about. It was just my dad's guitar. But we knew it was, like, he knew himself it was worth a lot of money. And it wasn't really about that. It was just this instrument in the family that he played. And but we were definitely, I suppose from the 90s, mid-90s onwards, Gibson Les Pauls start becoming very valuable, and we start to understand more that it was kind of worth a lot, you know.
One of the cool things about Joe's guitar is that as a result of him owning it since 1969, this guitar has never circulated around the circle of collectors. That's a really cool part of this instrument. Most of the instruments, most of the 59 bursts have now circulated in one way or another. That means they've been bought and sold over time. This one is really cool because the provenance of Joe owning it since '69 and then that being his main guitar, his #1 guitar since then, makes it very, very special. That's something that's very rare in the collector's world.
So my first thought was, this is, you know, a once in a career type of a guitar to surface. You know, maybe one globally surfaces a year these days. So to have a 1959 that's, you know, got provenance and has, you know, this whole history of ownership and stories made available for sale is a very rare occurrence. I'm such a fan of these guitars, and I've got, you know, a file full of records of these guitars and a shelf full of books on these guitars. To see one that I was not familiar with before, always a very exciting moment.
The guitar needed work. There were a few things that needed to be restored. First was refretting it. As I started playing it and I put my hand across the fretboard, the frets were entirely flat. And so I took the guitar to Nick at Glaser Instruments, and he did a number of things. Refretting the guitar, changing the nut and cutting it. Remember, Joe was a lefty, so in order to set up the guitar for right-handed playing, the nut had to be replaced. And he also changed the tuners. We had Grovers installed as replacement tuners.
When we scan a guitar, we are using our world-class technology to get every little detail of that guitar recorded in 3 dimensions. So our scanning wand, you know, we wave it all over the instrument, every contour from the neck, the body, any wear spot that's significant we want to capture. And then we can actually program that, you know, later on, weeks and weeks of cleaning up that data. We program profiles like the neck profile, the body carve, and then any wear information that we want to record if we're going to make a replica of that exact instrument. That guitar is more than just a guitar. It's, you know, you're carrying on the story behind the guitar. And when you play that guitar, you're feeling, you know, or sometimes expressing through the guitar part of its story. So to me, as an owner and as a collector, knowing the history of a guitar is super important because that's what makes the guitar special.
One of the questions you might be asking is, what am I going to call this guitar? And I thought a lot about that. I spoke with Paul, I spoke with the family, and we landed on Orphanage Burst. And the reason is pretty obvious. That was Joe's first band. And so, in order to continue the legacy of this instrument, this 59 Burst is going to be called the Orphanage Burst.
Even after he passed away, I remember I had the guitar. There was nobody at home. I was just by myself, and I had this moment with it, and I just kind of just played it a bit and just looked at it, you know, took some photographs, and just I had an afternoon with it myself, just playing it. It was very enjoyable.
I think Dad would be very happy and proud that the guitar is going back to basically where it came from, to its roots. And, you know, to us, it's like his legacy lives on.
Yeah, it's wonderful the guitar is going back to Gibson, where it was created in the first place. And it's a great legacy to Joe's memory, you know, that the guitar is going back to its birthplace as such. And he'd be very happy about that. And we're very happy about it as well.
The other side of the history of the guitar is keeping the story of Joe alive. I feel responsible in a way to do that, and I feel like I'm a custodian of that story, and it's my responsibility to tell that story and to let everybody know what this guitar went through, what it did with Joe, and what Joe did for music using this 59 Burst.
Old guitars like that should be, you know, treasured, and they were the sound of, you know, the 50s, 60s and 70s. There's nothing like a Les Paul.
I think it's great that Joe's story is going to be told and that he's one of the great guitar players from Ireland.
Anybody who ever gets the chance to go home, we're always glad to see them. So when the fact that Joe's Gibson, is going back to its original home, I think that's kind of a beautiful thing in a real nice kind of way. That's where it was born, that's when it's going back there. And I'm sure people from all over the world will be able to see it much easier there. So I'm delighted it's gone back there. I'm just sorry that Joe couldn't deliver it himself.
Wednesday's even worse. Acid Thursday's awful sad.